Thank you for coming to my daddy's podcast. Daddy's going to start right now.
Welcome back to the Lessons for Success show. I'm your host, Adam Wardlaw, a middle school science teacher and a high school football coach here in the great state of South Carolina. I just want to thank everybody that's been supporting the show so far. Lessons for Success has now been heard in over 5 countries and over 22 states here in America. Hopefully, you've all gained some valuable insight from our guests so far on the show. Remember that new episodes come out every Sunday, and the show is available everywhere where podcasts can be found. Keep up with the show on our social media accounts at L4S Show or use the hashtag L4S Show. Again, that's the number 4. You can also send in messages to the show by downloading the Anchor app. Feel free to send in any questions or comments related to the show so it can be featured in future episodes of the podcast.
Daddy, who are you talking to?
This week's guest is Coach John Torrey. John is a teacher and coach with over a decade of experience in the classroom and on the sidelines. After graduating college, John spent some time working for the Iowa State University football team, as well as the San Francisco 49ers. In 2016, John completed his master's degree in coaching and athletic administration from Concordia University, Irvine. John currently teaches 7th grade social studies and is a high school football and wrestling coach. Coach Torrey is the author of More Than a Game and is co-host of the Culture Classroom podcast. Keep up with John on Twitter at Mr. Torrey and at CultureClass19. Enjoy.
Coach, thank you so much for bringing me on. I appreciate it. I love what you're doing and love what you do in your classroom and with your podcast and platform as a teacher and a coach. I'm trying to do the same thing in Denison, Iowa. I teach 7th grade because I think that's still an age where you can catch kids. You know, they're not really fully adults yet. I tell people all the time I'm in the second chance business because I know 7th graders, their brain hasn't fully matured. It's not even close yet. And they're just now starting to think kind of like an adult would. And so they're going to make mistakes. They're going to mess up. And I like the ability to coach them through those mistakes rather than wait till they're at a pivotal moment in their life and you can't really go back and hit the reset button. So that's why I teach 7th grade. I coach high school football and wrestling. And it's been a big part of my life since I was a little kid. Growing up here in Iowa, I grew up in a small town and in isolation, really. I was 15 miles from the closest town and grew up on a farm. We had 500 acres of corn and beans and alfalfa. And then we had about 25 milk cows that had to be milked twice a day. And we had about 200 head of hogs and another 200 head of feeder cattle on top of all that. And so life on the farm is super busy. Couldn't get away. We didn't go on vacation ever because the milk cows always needed to be milked or, you know, something was always going on with the other animals or the crops. And so that's really hard when you're trying to grow up and have experiences and you just felt tied to the farm all the time. And I'm the oldest, so I've got a younger sister and a younger brother, and not much was expected out of them. So being the oldest male on the farm, you know, my grandpa ran it. My dad was also the co-facilitator. And then I was the one who had to do chores. So I had to get up in the morning and go out and make sure the cows were ready to be milked before I got on the school bus to start the day. Or if I misbehaved, I was out in the middle of a field on a hot day or just being put to work, those kind of things. Or if I wanted some money to go join my friends up at Okoboji, which is like a great area resort close to my hometown, you know, I had to scoop out the hog shed or whatever for my $20, whereas my friends, they were just kind of given those things. So I really hated that upbringing because more was expected of me than I was probably ready for, but it really prepared me to be successful as an adult or what the adult world was really going to be like. The other thing is my grandpa passed away about 10 years ago, and we sold our farm about 15 years ago when he got to a point where he couldn't manage it anymore. And my dad has had his teaching endorsement for a long time, even though he kind of went back to be a farmer, and now he's back teaching, doing what he probably should have been doing for the last 30 years. And not having the farm anymore has really given me appreciation for what it was like. And now as a parent, I try to take what the responsibilities I had growing up, and I want my kids to have some responsibilities too, but the world's just different because, they don't have to get up at 6 in the morning when it's 110 degrees outside and walk all the cows in, or they don't have to go outside when it's 40 below and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground and the wind is whipping right in your face. And you go back in and you try to take a shower after being in the barn and your fingers are ready to fall off or they're stinging on fire because they're so cold and the water's so hot and you just want to get warm again. My kids won't ever experience those struggles. But as a dad, that's a real challenge for me because that brings back great memories, not great at the time, but great after the fact of like, hey, I can get through about everything because my upbringing was really tough.
You talk about just all these responsibilities that you kind of had to do without any sort of choice, and how nowadays that really a lot of those things are, they might be obsolete in some ways, or they just might be not be practical in other ways. As a teacher, like how do you try to, instill that in your students? Obviously you can't just keep handing them work or shoving work down their throat, but how do you, generate this idea that you're going to have a lot of responsibility or there's these high expectations? How do you do that in your own classroom?
Yeah, I think the first lesson is that life is hard. I mean, really, that's what it was. It's like I was born and it's like, okay, John, well, life is hard for you or it's different for you. And there's a real thing. The Midwest work ethic, it's real. Like I've lived in New York, I've lived in California, I've moved around the country, and I just have a better work ethic than other people. I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and get a little bit dirty or to put in long hours or to do tasks that other people aren't. And I think the sooner kids can learn that, then they're going to be more prepared in life. I just saw a tweet the other day about a guy who, a coach that I know and follow, and he's got a former student who's interning with an NFL team right now as they get ready for starting camp. And this intern was asked to do something by the coaching staff, and he wasn't really sure what to do or how to do it or that he even wanted to do it. And it's like, that's your job. Don't wait around for someone to tell you what to do. Just take initiative and make sure that it gets done. It doesn't really matter how the cows get milked, growing up on the farm, going back to that. It's just, did that get done? And that was put on me at a very early age, and there was no hitting the snooze, or there was no, oh gosh, Dad, I don't feel like it. And the sooner kids can get used to that, it's that discomfort that we want to instill in kids, that I try to instill in my athletes. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. The sooner kids can become uncomfortable, then that's just going to be something that stays with them the rest of their life.
It's human nature to not want to do anything that's going to get you out of that comfort zone that you just mentioned. If it's running, people don't want to run because your heart rate gets to where it's having to actually do some work and stuff like that. But I totally agree with you. If you want to be successful, you better get used to always being in some sort of always having some sort of stress. It might be higher at some points or lower at some points, but there's always going to be that responsibility or those things that are placing stress on you. It's what you do when that stuff happens that separates the people that are going to be successful from the ones that are not. You talk about, or I know in your book that it's more than a game, and that's something I'd love to dive in here. Was a lot of the motivation to create this book based on some of these lessons from when you grew up, or were there some other events that happened, maybe in sports in particular, that kind of led you to want to deliver this message in your book more than a game?
Yeah, so great question. First of all, being an author or writing a book has been something I've talked about for a long time. That's been a lifelong dream. So to actually sit down and make it a realization, and kudos to my wife, she's on this journey with me with the financial investment and with the time and the effort that I spend away from her. I couldn't do it without her support and backing. But my journey in athletics was different, and there's nothing wrong with it. It was different. I was 4'11" at 89 pounds as a freshman in high school. And I grew a whole foot my senior year. So now I'm 6'2" and I'm 230 pounds. You probably need to lose 20 or 30 pounds. But growing up, I was always the smallest. I was the oldest in my family. And people would look at my younger sister and my younger brother, and they think that I was the baby. And the opposite was happening. And it just was one of those weird growth maturation things that I couldn't control. And so my senior year, I shot up a whole foot, and that's the cards that were dealt to me. And so I wasn't a very good athlete. I was always involved, but not really ever a contributor. I'm sure some of my coaches along the way gave up on me or wrote me off or dismissed me in some ways. And I can't really blame them for that. But my heart was just always in it. And so I went to college on a scholarship, and then I interned with a couple big teams, like interned with Nebraska, the University of Nebraska, and their football team during a national championship season. And then went to 3 Super Bowls while I was in college working for the NFL. And then my first job out of college was on Dan McCarney's staff at Iowa State, so right here local in the area. And then I worked my way all the way up to the 49ers before I became a teacher. And without the work ethic that I learned on the farm, and without being told no repeatedly because of my size or my ability, that really shaped me to persevere and to be relentless, especially when I faced other challenges. I was used to that. It's something that I've had to do my whole life. And now, I mean, again, just try to tell that to kids. Is like, I was talking with Coach Kurt Hines the other day because we're having him on our podcast. And he's talking about relentless is the waves that just pound the shore, and they keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. And to me, that was really kind of my upbringing, or that's really during my formative years, that's what I had to experience. It's funny that you mentioned More Than the Game as my book, because every chapter of my book is dedicated to somebody who made a huge difference in my life along the way. So I've tried to take a hodgepodge of lessons that I've learned from the time I was a little guy now to an adult, and honor the people who have shared those lessons with me in one consecutive story. But I pay homage to all those people in the back of the book, and it talks about what chapter is dedicated to what person and for what reason and what lesson I learned. And that's just kind of a thank you, a pay it forward kind of thing. Like, I can't ever go back and repay the people that have made the biggest impact on my life, but by honoring them, and some of them aren't alive anymore. So by honoring them and their legacy, that's what I'm about, because I'm a big believer in the self-made man. And in some respects, I am a self-made man, but no one gets there by themselves. So it's all these people cumulatively that have made a difference in my life for the positive, that have shaped me into the person I am today. And that's why I teach, and that's why I coach. And people ask me all the time, well, Coach Torrey, how come you're not still with the 49ers? Or how come you're still not in the NFL? And my platform is bigger as a middle school teacher and a high school coach than it ever would be in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny you mentioned that. We were talking to our guys the other day about going out and seeking people that are going to give you, they're going to shape you in some way. A lot of people nowadays, they just want to go out and find people that are going to tell them what they want to hear. They're not going to challenge them. But if you really want to be great, you're going to want to be pushed. You're going to want to be critiqued so that you know how you can do things better. I think it's really, your story's crazy because, you talked about kind of how you were against all the odds just because of your physical stature and things like that. For the kids out there that don't necessarily have that maybe are right now the best player on their team, or maybe next year will be the best player on their team, what do you kind of preach to those guys to kind of keep them level-headed and, just keep them tenacious where they're still trying to be coachable and things like that? Because I don't know about in your area, but I feel like, definitely kind of in our area, just with the small towns and things like that, once somebody becomes the best player on their team in the small towns around here, they feel like they've arrived. They don't feel like they need to continue to improve. So, what are some things that maybe you were kind of saying to those guys that keep them level-headed?
First of all, I think that's a great point. The thing that kept me getting through, and I go back to my younger version of myself, the thing that I always hung my hat on was, it's not always going to be like this. So if you're one of those people that arrived early, or whether it's physical maturation, or whether you're the smartest kid in your class, you're a 35 ACT tester, whatever, it's not always going to be like that. So once you hit different stages in your life, you're going to change. And if you don't, then you're going to get surpassed. Mm-hmm. So if you're the biggest athlete right now, go find an area that's bigger, where you can be pushed and challenged. Because the thing that kept me going was people constantly telling me no. Or when I get to a spot where people didn't think it was possible, it's just like, okay, I'm going to find another way in. And I tell that to kids all the time. When I sit down and do goal setting with my athletes, a lot of them want to say, oh, I want a $3 million contract, or, oh, I want to go make the NFL. Well, that's just not a reality. And I don't want to burst kids' bubbles. They're still impressionable. You still need to honor their dreams. But I also have to be truthful in my response to them. And my thing is always, well, that's great, but it might not be as a player. You might be an equipment manager like I was with the 49ers. You might be decaling helmets or loading luggage onto a plane. You're still part of the organization. When I would walk onto our team plane, my seat still said John Torrey with the 49ers logo. I still had to sign. I still had my check signed by the 49ers organization. Now, I never played in that capacity, but there's all these other ways you can live your dream. And so I think sometimes we're so short-sighted as a society, or by what other people tell us, that we forget about we can live our dream in different ways.
It's funny how we've kind of gotten to this point. Before we started recording, me and you had this conversation about how similar our schools were just in terms of the surrounding communities and stuff like that, where, as students might see that, oh, well, my parents or my guardians they did this and now they've got this job. They turned out fine. So maybe I can just do those same things and just get to this point. And it's like you said, you've got to want to be better than that, because you can't guarantee that down the road things are going to be just like they are now. So maybe shifting focus kind of back to the school part of it. How do you get students to have that foresight where they're not that short-sighted? I know that's probably $1 million question that everybody wants to know, but what are some of the things that you're just kind of mentioning to them in your classroom, just about, understanding that just the way things are now, that's not how they're always going to be?
Well, I think that's really important, because I deal with some kids that are from some really, really tough backgrounds. I try to get kids to come out for football or wrestling all the time, and I know they've got some ability, but they'll say, oh, coach, my parents, they're working at the factory, and I've got to go home because I got 4 other siblings that I'm responsible for. And I mean, again, those are barriers, and you got to try to see past that, and that's that short-sightedness. I think it all comes back, though. My book is really centered on 3 things, which I call the process of the ship. And it's a process because without the first step, none of the others ever materialize, or it all kind of falls apart. And that first step is all about relationships. From the minute kids come into my classroom, and maybe even before, because if I've had siblings or if I see them in the community, those kind of things, then they've seen me in another capacity. Our relationship has already started. But you have to be able to build relationships with all kinds of people. And, at first, like, the thing about it is so the rule of trust is that it takes longer than 7 days, but fewer than 7 years to build trust with somebody.
Wow.
Teaching 7th grade, I don't have 7 years with them. I want them at 5, 6 years, maybe till they get to high school graduation. So I think that's another reason why I like teaching 7th grade, is that kids want to trust you. They naturally believe in your abilities as a leader right away. Most of them don't have the cynicism that we get as we grow into adults. Mm-hmm. But you have to be able to build relationships with kids. I'm a really good recruiter as far as getting kids to try my sport. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to do it for 5 or 6 years. Just try it, and we'll see, and I'll coach you the best that I can. And for the most part, I can get kids to stay out at least 1 season because of my relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And then my coaching abilities, trying to bring them from wherever they start along the way. But I've got kids that want to eat lunch with me all the time. I've got kids that hit me up on Twitter. They listen to my podcast. They read my book. These are kids that don't even read or that they don't trust other adults in our building. But I'm really good at building relationships with kids. And that helps me from everything else, because once that relationship erodes, you've lost it. You're never going to get that kid back on your side again.
It's crazy. It's something else we talked about before we started recording, that these things just take time. And so, if you're a teacher or a coach or anybody out there that's in the people business, where you're going to put relationships first, you better be willing to invest time. Like you said, if it means, spending your lunches with a group of students just to kind of have more time to develop, that's what it's going to take. You got to kind of just treat them like they're their own kids, or they're your own kids. So, Coach, we kind of talked about that 3-step process. So first is building relationships. Can you care to kind of go through with those second and third steps?
Yeah. So really, the bulk of the book centers on relationships. But once you get that down, if you've got kids and they're seeking you out and they're looking for more and they trust you and all those things, and you're blessed with more time with them as an individual, if you really want them to change where they're going, their direction in their life, you need to build leadership into them. Mm-hmm. And I do that in a variety of ways. So relationships plus leadership, and it's goal setting, and not just I want to sign a $3 million contract. Well, no kidding. I do too, and I'm 40 now. But, it's SMART goals is what I call it. And it's from a book called Mind Gym. And I don't think SMART goals is anything new, but it's got to be specific and measurable. Mm-hmm. And then there has to be a time stamp on it too. And one of the things that I'm big on is get rid of that I need a $3 million contract. No, you don't. Mm-hmm. Like, everything will take care of itself. For example, I've got a sophomore in high school who's going to be a junior this year, and he wants to be an all-state wide receiver. He wants to go play college football. Great goals. He's driven. He's had a great summer. But we returned every single skill player from last year. Mm-hmm. So when I sat down to do this SMART goals process with him, I had to be like, Jaden, look, like, you're not going to get on the field and have 500 yards receiving this year. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. But we talked about how one of our core values in our football program is commitment. So I said, but you can show that you're committed and ready for your opportunity by being at practice 100% of the time, staying after 10 minutes to catch balls or run routes or do extra activity, by making sure that you're letting teammates know or giving people rides if they need rides to and from practice, those kind of things. You can show commitment. And so all of a sudden I want to play college ball, I want to be a contributor on a high school team, became, look, I'm just going to live by the core values that we've set up for them as a coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And that's going to help our program way more than all that other stuff.
And so after you build upon that leadership, that third and final step, what's that step look like?
That's the championships. And so relationships plus leadership, that's where you get the championships. And just to go back to leadership just a little bit, one of the things that you're going to need if you're going to be a champion is you need a mindset. Like, we're doing more mental training in the sport of football right now than we ever have. It used to be physical, beat your body to a pulp. But now if you're not doing any kind of mental training, and when I talk about that, we talk about a flush mechanism. So what do you say to yourself when you're having a bad play? Or what do you do to prepare and let go of whatever happened on the last play to what do you do to get ready for the next play? Or, the E plus R equals O kind of thing. So event, response, outcome. I'm using more of that in my classroom. We have a commitment continuum where it starts with, I'm reluctant, and it finishes with I'm compelled, or I'm going to make this happen. And just all those little things, coaching people along the way to just giving them little nuggets that they're going to be able to apply across all areas of their life. And then hopefully 20 years down the road, that's what we're after. So relationships, I want to use my influence to build that leadership. And then I don't care about the championships. I'm never going to win a state title here in Denison. It's just not going to happen. It hasn't happened, and I don't see it happening again, and I'm okay with that. Down the road, 26 miles is our rival. Of the 35 state high school championships we played in Iowa, their football team has played in 26 of them, and they've won 13. That's never going to be us. I'm never going to hang a state championship banner. So if I only focus on winning, then my existence here in Denison is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And Coach Joe Ehrman, who, played for the Baltimore Colts a long time ago, and if you haven't read Inside Out Coaching, you need to do that. But he talks about a 20-year window where what's it going to be like in 20 years? I don't know if I've won a championship when these guys that I'm coaching now are almost 40 like I am right now, and they're They've got great jobs and they're great fathers and husbands and they're in committed relationships. That's when I'll know that I've been a success as a coach. I talked to Ken Winkler out of Gallup, New Mexico on our podcast. We interviewed him a little while ago, and he has a better way of saying it, so I'm stealing it, but it's 4 for 40. In other words, as high school coaches, we have 4 years to set up the next 40 years for the kids that come through our program.
Well, yeah, it's a great way to put it. It's so hard too to, we talk about how the kids need to have that long-term vision, but it's even hard for adults to have it as well. But I forget who I was talking to now, but they said, when you first start to get those students or former players that you see out and about and they're growing with families and stuff, that payoff is just this great thing. And so, I know personally I'm still waiting for those kind of moments just because I haven't been doing this that long. But, I'm so excited for that payoff just to kind of see what these guys are doing that I'm trying to pour into right now. John, I appreciate you giving me so much of your time tonight. One thing I like to do just to kind of wrap these interviews up is, and it could be something that we've already talked about so far, maybe something that we haven't hit on yet, but if you just kind of had to summarize in your own words what keys to success there are for anybody out there, just things that they could be doing or trying to think about to be more successful, what would you suggest?
All right, looking at it from a 7th, 8th grade lens, they're going to like hearing this, but this is exactly what it's going to require. It's short, it's easy, it's memorable. You either need to increase your discipline or decrease your dreams. Increase your discipline or decrease your dreams. If you have a dream of being an elite pro player, there's a whole lot more discipline that goes with that. It's a lot easier to be a high school teacher. The discipline required for a high school teacher is not as great as an NFL player.
I appreciate you giving me all your time tonight. If there's any way that you prefer people to kind of be keeping up with you in the podcast, the Culture Classroom, that you're also the second half of, we talked to John Weaver on an earlier episode. What are kind of the main outlets that you'd like people to go out if they want to keep up with you?
Yeah, so I'm a big Twitter user. My Twitter handle is at Mr. Torrey, Mr. all spelled out, and then Torrey, Torrey. I've got an author page also, but I don't use that as much as my personal account. It's a lot of football on there, so if you're not a football guy, don't be offended if that's all you see. And then Culture Classroom, we are at Culture Class 19. So podcasts, especially for you guys that don't like to read. I'm a big reader. I just finished my 100th book of 2019 this afternoon, actually, and I'm making my notes on it tonight. But if you're not a big reader and you got half hour in the car or, Randy Jackson calls it Automobile University, podcasts are a great way to gain knowledge, and then applying that knowledge will help you stay disciplined and separate you from the other people. So at Culture Class 19 or at Mr. Torrey on Twitter, and I'd be glad to talk with anybody who wants to know more or wants more about what I do. I'm a sharer. Everything is on the table.
John, thank you so much for giving me your time tonight. I hope I didn't keep you up too late.
No, it's great. I really appreciate it, and thank you for what you're doing with your listeners and with your students. It is so important. The world of education needs more people like you.
Daddy, what have we learned this week?
Increase your discipline or decrease your dreams. If you don't get anything else from this episode, I hope that quote sticks with you. Let's review this lesson for success. Whatever your dreams are in life, for yourself, your team, or your organization, this quote should motivate you throughout the process. Understand that if you have lofty goals and expectations, you're going to have to be more and more focused and aware of all the things that could contribute or stand in the way of your vision. In life, you have a lot more freedom and choice than you may realize. But if you have specific dreams that you're going to accomplish, you'll need to make those decisions that can get you closer to reaching those goals. Being disciplined isn't easy, and that is what separates people who accomplish their goals from those that do not. Well, that's it for this week's Lesson for Success. Be sure to interact with the show on Twitter and Instagram at L4S Show, mentioning us or using the hashtag L4S Show. Again, that's the number 4. Episodes will also be placed on the YouTube channel Lessons for Success Show. Download the Anchor app in order to send in messages to the show, and your questions and comments could be featured on future episodes. All of the episodes are available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that podcasts can be found, so be sure to like, subscribe, and rate. Thank you again for listening to the Lessons for Success Show podcast.
That's the end of our show. Thank you for listening.